changed my topic from the announcement to what I'm doing now, because I thought, after listening to Jaure Abraham, who spoke on linguistic genocide, I couldn't tell something about the genocide, but in the proceedings of this conference, we also will be able to read the text I originally brought with me for this conference, but I thought because of next year it would be good to have a second presentation on the side note. What we are experiencing these days in the Arabic world, in the chaos of political turmoil, expulsion and deprivation of rights of Christians in the Middle East, has already, in an unequally precise planning with far-reaching consequences, occurred in an, until then, never-seen way during World War I. The planned extermination of Christian peoples in the Ottoman Empire and its adjacent areas. I just go now to the sources we have from Syriacs who were survivors of the genocide in the German mission archives. We have a lot of Syriac letters and translated letters. In the case of the Arms Profession, around 20 letters are untranslated, still in Syriac. And I will a little bit explain what they wrote, that was in a few points. And I just looked to two of the mission archives. I think, with one exception, they can be paradigmatic for what we have in all the mission archives in Germany. As you know, Germany was an ally of the Turks, so the mission could be active during the whole time of the genocide. So, number one, the reports of the Hermannsburg mission. Missionaries from Hermannsburg had to write regularly reports every year, twice. The procedure also was expected by the priests of the Church of the East that were connected with the Hermannsburg. Additionally, there was a large exchange of letters dealing with personal issues or with the constantly controversial financial support. Some of the priests had studied Lutheran theology in Germany and even wrote their letters in German. Some weren't capable of German and knew only smallest pieces or nothing. Jaure Abraham, their letters were translated by members of their own ethnic group into German, like, for example, the letters written in Syriac by Jaure Abraham, whose letters were translated by his sons, and those of Kasha, translated by other priests of his church. Number two, reporting. From different points of view and in a different way affected by the genocide, all priests wrote to their German persons of trust. In the beginning, because they were hoping to get a protection guarantee. Later, because they wanted to make their desperate situation public, wanted to be saved by their German partners, help and wanted to organize help for the survivors and refugees. 2.8. Yohanan. Already in the beginning, everything was stolen from him, and he could, not even having clothes left, flee to Urmia with his son. His community, Syriac, was totally destroyed. His church was burned. A return was impossible. First he fled with his family and his son to Hamadan, from there back to Urmia, and from there to Tiflis. In Tiflis he worked for the Lutheran Nestorians who lived there, but only to a very small extent. An Armenian intermediary reported to the mission that he was broken. It took years afterwards the World War ended until he could migrate via Constantinople with his family to his son, who by then lived in Alsace, and whom there took care of the Syrian refugees in Marseille. In a hospital near Strasbourg, he found refuge with his wife and his disabled daughter. His wife and daughter stayed in that place after his death and after the further migration of his son to the United States of America. He was the first priest of the Church of the East who, from 1875 on, studied Lutheran theology in Germany. His German was fragmental, but good to understand, remaining pieces of his community gathered after World War I in Basirha, but stayed without priest and church, and his family is still living in a close contact with the generation of our days. To be Luther, so it's a very funny thing that he gives the name Luther for his son, the free name. The son of Jaure Abraham had studied theology in Germany just like his father, and was an important translator of Lutheran scripts into East Syrian language. In the end, he worked as a priest in the only open church of the Apostolic Church of the East in the town of Romania. He did this on request of the Bishop Elia, who as well lived in Romania, and explicitly against the concerns of the cardinals from Germany in Hermesburg. Luther, who already lost his son during the first part of the escape because of a typhus epidemic that was spread beyond the refugees, was saved in Romania by a Muslim friend who accommodated them in his house. Secretly, the family escaped from the besieged house. The Muslim neighbors secured a part of his belongings. After repeated massive riots, he fled with his family with the Russian troops that marched off via Russia and Sweden to Germany. Here he informed all over Germany about the genocide. His reports attracted attention because he is constantly endeavored to give explanation for what happened and gives information to the events even from other places. In these explaining reports, he tries to give theological interpretation of the events. After the World War, he went profession related to Alsace and took care of the Syrian refugees in France. Finally, he found a job in the United States of America and took his family with him. His most significant piece of translation, the Syrian translation of Luther's Smaller Catechism, was published during his time in the United States. Even after the World War, Johannes Lepsius, the leading German man for to make public the genocide in Germany, he must flee out of Germany because he did it against the censorship of the state, tried to gain Luther for his ideas of publishing an article in the journal Der Christliche Orient, Christian Orient, about the genocide of the Syrians. The article didn't come out anymore, but numerous articles were written by him. For example, in the missionary journal Nachrichten aus der Lutherischen Mission in Persia, News from the Lutheran Mission in Persia, which was printed with 10,000 copies. For both authors, I will quote a report from the first wave of violence after its drop. The survivors hoped that such excesses would not be repeated, but soon new reports came up about new outbreaks of violence. I quote now from one of his reports. If I should describe the experience of the last 10 months, I had to write whole books. But I have to cut myself short. Approximately in the middle of last year's December, the Russians marched off from Romania. Many Christians from the town and the villages along their way went with them. Saturday, the 20th of December, all Russians were gone. On Sunday, 21st of December, all Christians were left unprotected to the fanatic anger of the Mohammedan population. All Christian villages and houses in the Dusa and near Romania were sacked. All men, women and children deprived of their clothes and money. All men and young people from the villages which were further away from the town were shot by the Mohammedans. As soon as the Turks got safe notice from the Mohammedans, sorry, my eyes, from the moment that the Russians were gone, they overwhelmed the country. Gogtapa, where people from 20 Christian villages tried to find refuge, was saved from the slaughter by the bravery of the American missionary Dr. Eckhart and two Syrian young men, Joseph Khan and Dr. David Khan. He wrote with his companion on Monday the 23rd of December to the Kurdish chiefs who besieged Gogtapa with many thousands of workers. In the negotiation that took hours, all Dr. Eckhart could achieve from the Kurds was that the residents of Gogtapa surrender, and their souls, meaning only their lives, were given to Dr. Eckhart as a present, but all their belongings would belong to the Kurds. This way, many thousands were saved and brought to the American mission. We were saved as if it was a miracle of God. Our landlady sent for a young Mohammedan who was friends with her family. Because her husband fled with the Russians, they accommodated her guest. In the evening, he said to us that if anything would happen, he would take us with him to his house. On Saturday morning, the 21st of December, we were besieged by the Mohammedan rebels. We were all lost. But, as sent by God, this young Mohammedan came with his 5 brothers, and they helped us to gather our rugs and furniture and transport it to their house. In the evening, they took us to their house, where we stayed for a month and a half. And I was very scared of my father and his family. But after 3 days, they came deprived of everything, even their clothes, to the American mission. I took them with me to that Mohammedan house. The atrocities that Mohammedans and Kurds did are indescribable things. From the French mission force, 46 people stayed arrested. They were bonded together, arm with arm, and shot upon the order of the Turks. In Gulfashan were killed over 80 people. Women and girls were revealed to the dirty lusts of this wild pack. Even though the Turkish consulate and the Kurdish state guaranteed the villages full safety, many villages like Adar and Spurgan, indescribable horror attacked. Many died as martyrs for their belief's sake. Many women and girls were abducted by Kurds and Mohammedans. Of our little people, over 18,000 died, were killed or destroyed. All churches, also our Wazirabad and Gogtapa, were burned. As long as the Turks ruled here, no bells would ring. Many Christians from the town were arrested and their money was extorted from them in inhuman ways. Some were hanged. One of those was a Kurd who became a Christian. During the Holy Easter, instead of bells were heard the cries for help of the women and children, in whose house the Mohammedans broke in. Almost every night, when one house was broken into and robbed. In many nights we slept in our clothes to be ready if we had to run away. The Presbyterian missionaries denied themselves during the 5 months of affliction and served everyone, friend and foe. They earned respect from the Mohammedans, Turks, Christians, and Jews. Just think of the burden of 15,000, at least 12,000, people came in the small rooms of the mission and fed by the mission. The children died on measles, then by the cold and dysentery. At least typhus came and killed even the best young men and virgins, who were saved by the American flag from the sword. 30 to 40 people died every day in the mission. Also our beloved predecessor's son became a victim of typhus, while my brother Ignatius and my sister Louise recovered. For 5 months I had to feed the whole family of my father. Furthermore, I lost possessions from my house worth 252 months, the cow and its food, such as dried raisins, winter stock, and so on. Now I have 262 months deaths, 12, 15, 20%. It is God's miracle that I haven't died with my family on hunger. But Syriac is destroyed, houses demolished, doors and windows stolen. In Gogtapa, houses, doors and windows were left because there could be stolen so much in civilians. To see Jaure Abraham. Originally, he was deacon of Gogtapa, but soon he was in charge of the biggest community of the so-called Lutheran Nestorians, Gogtapa. These reports of the genocide give the most immediate insight to the events. They let the events occur from the perspective of a helplessly exposed person in the eyes of the German captives. It doesn't offer contemplation to the backgrounds of the violence that was used against them. Everything is focused on experiences of a survivor who at the same time is fighting for the surviving of his family. And his successive loss of all his belongings during the escape gets into the focus as well. His texts are no reports about facts, but the attempt to share his feelings and his desperation. The diction afflicted by his trauma, but not only this, has always to be thought of already on the first part of his escape. His wife died. I cut her now the next things because I see my time is running, so you would believe me, I think that the reports are in this way more private, more about how he was feeling. The next one would have been Lazarus Jaure. He wrote a whole book on the genocide, and he lost all his family on the way to Sweden, and he immediately, when he was in Sweden, started to bring the information to the German and Swedish public. And I now, just because this is new for everyone, I hope, I switch now going out of the Ramonsburgischen archive to the archive of the German Oriental. They had two orphanages near Urmia and Troy. At least a short view on the reports of the German mission of the Orient. Its workers got expelled from the country by the Persian authorities on the urge of the Russians. They handed over their orphanage in Gogtapa to the American Lutherans that was there present as well. From then on, they could only have contact by letters to their former protégés. As an example from a report of an orphan girl to the exiled house mother, I quote, "Beloved mother, many, many love from your daughter Sultan. I have been so happy to hear from you that I have immediately brought the letter to Mrs. Klaumer so she could translate it for me. How happy I am that you are feeling good. Daily I pray that God may keep you safe and bless you. You have always been a mother to me and your girls. I always think of our good home. I am so sad. Right now, the military is in our house. After you have been gone for 2 months, the Kurds came. The bad Mohammedans from the town and the Kurds have destroyed our house, all our houses, and the church, and the government. At that time, the Kurds have arrested and killed many. Many people flee to the missions. We had many diseases, first measles and typhus. That was a horrible time for Christians. It was endless work for the American missionaries, lots of work and effort. During those 6 months, the missionaries gave bread to the Syrians daily, and Dr. Packard and the other doctors treated these diseases without money. She then lists all of those children of the house that have died, who all are buried in the garden of the German mission. Oh, my beloved mother, I don't want to tell you too much about our house. It would only hurt you. The orphanage was then taken over by the German-American Pastor Klaumer, who himself became a victim in a later wave of violence. His widow reports in a journal of the mission, I quote, "On the 3rd 30th to the 31st of July, left the Christians Romania. A couple of hours later, the Kurds and Turks have already arrived at the town. We stayed in our house since we were not engaged into politics. We didn't think of danger. We were undisturbed until 2 in the afternoon, when someone knocked at the gate. Outside were Turkish soldiers who wanted to come in. With a couple of minutes, the yard was full with soldiers, Turks. Within 3 to 4 hours, we were beggars, without home, clothing, and beds. She tells that we then went to a house that was rented for the institution, and goes on. Some Kurds and a Turkish sergeant followed us and requested money. We had no more money. The sergeant sent for one of the girls and let him abuse my husband. He was given whipping, beaten, and kicked with heavy boots. Finally, he shot my husband in front of mine. He was dead immediately. The shot went right through his head. End of quotation. Conclusion. The reports of the German Mission Archives can help to reconstruct the overall picture of events and would have to be taken into a comparing analysis with the numerous other reports of mission, militaries, and diplomats. A first insight is not capable of doing that, but it wants to call attention to the fact that plentiful material is waiting to be historically proceeded. Thereby, a major contribution would be done that the genocide of 1950 would not be buried in oblivion. And as you all know, I'm active with the German government because of Syria. And I think I must not tell where is the bridge from 1950 to our days. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Tamcke. Just have some minutes for questions. Mark?
Thank you very much, Martin, for a very interesting survey of what I would describe as the treatment of Christians in that region from very reliable sources. It reminds me very much of a couple of articles I published recently. I did refer to them as a comment after Dr. Schaber's paper, but I'd like just to mention them here by comparison. I'm referring to a very extensive body of letters sent by Jeremiah Shamir from that region, well, northern Mesopotamia, anyway, to Zahra, dated from 1816 right up to the early 19th century. Well, I think I would dare to describe those as an archive as well. So together with the German archives and the British archives, we get a vivid picture of how our Christian fellows had been treated with waves of persecution. A bit of comparison. Would you describe the present situation in Iraq and Syria as a new genocide, or worse genocide?
I answer first to your first sentences, if I allow to do this more historical thing. I just published last year a small booklet on Lazarus Jaure. That is published in German, and it's more or less a biography of him, so how he became a well-known Orientalist and coming into the genocide and survived and died in the US. And I finished more or less a book of maybe 800 pages on Yochanan Pira, so that will hopefully come out next bigger book on one into the Germans from the time 1870 to 1924. So that's just, you see, I'm working also on, I did not bring this into my paper because that is already there on the way to be there. So the second thing, we have in Germany a big discussion if this is persecution of Christians or not. You know, this is a discussion we have in Germany, especially because we have in Germany also a sensitivity how to act with Muslims without getting too much Islamophobia. So always when you tell too much about persecution, then someone is standing up and tell them, you can't speak it that way. So we have to use some diplomatic actions. And I was very happy when the government invited me to act as an advisor for doing the politics of Syria. And we did a lot of work. So I will not focus too much on the term. I would see, if you look to the newspapers, I was just guest professor at Atlanta in the US when it started, and I immediately say it's persecution. But I'm now, in this case, a little bit hesitant, not because it's not a persecution, but because the need at the moment is another one. We now do the second conference with the German Foreign Ministry with the religious leaders of Syria at the beginning of November from all parties, and that will be heavy work again. It was very difficult to do it the last time. And we brought together all 8 organizations in Germany who are engaged in Iraq and Syria to have a coordination of the work, because the problem was when the UN decided not to help in Syria but only outside Syria, a lot of chances were lost. And so we tried to do the opposite. I think we are out of time, so we must go. No, it's okay.
Thank you. We have